Welcome, Nick, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Redemption, this new album, I Am the Storm, and mostly related to the metal world. So we're starting asking, so how has the band been doing these last 4 years since the long night journey in today was and perhaps this new album was As I Am the Storm composed and written during the pandemic, or did perhaps it accelerate the composition process because a lot of musicians has more time to put details into the new album during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been an interesting, as it always is for us, journey. We finished our live package, Alive in Color, which took a long time. It was a 12 camera shoot. Took a long time to get that exactly how we wanted it, and then we were about to start work on a new record when the pandemic hit. And it was, we are geographically dispersed, with Tom in Sweden and Simone in Italy, and Vikram is on the East Coast of the United States, and the rest of us are pretty close. So we're used to writing without being in the same place. So that part wasn't that different. We actually started writing quite a bit of music, and that's why, people are looking at this record and wondering why there are two covers and an extra bonus remix and then other songs. We thought we were going to do two full albums. We had written so much stuff. And then it got to the point where Tom was getting busy with Evergrey writing, and we had other obligations going on. And then we didn't even know if we'd be able to release two albums at once. So we started thinking, we don't want to really speed things up just for the sake of getting this done. To do it right will take another few months. So we could either release what we've got now, which is an album and a half of music, including the two covers that we would have done, one for each record, or we can take another 4 or 6 months to finish it, and then probably have to sit on half the music for a year and a half. So we decided the better thing to do would be to release everything. But the pandemic didn't really have that much of an impact on us. Although, it might have enabled us to get more done, at least initially, in a shorter period of time.
Okay. Well, this new album, I Am the Storm, is again it's again recorded by Tom from Evergrey. So how does it feel to work again with him in the studio, and how do you deal with the, as you told me, Tom is a busy guy with Evergrey, with Silent Skies, with a lot of features and a lot of band. He has the own studio in Sweden, so here's a lot of things. So how do you deal to live presentation, Redemption, for this new album and the previous one?
Yeah, well, I think that's something we obviously, when you work with a vocalist that's busy and has other projects, and Tom is certainly an iconic vocalist. I went into it knowing that and promising to Tom that we were going to work certainly around Evergrey. Just as when Ray was our vocalist, we worked around Fates Warning. So that's a sacrifice that we're prepared to make. It's great working with Tom. He is busy, but he's an incredibly talented musician, and he's a composer. And so we can relate on a musical level pretty easily. And I think, I've gotten, as I did with Ray over many years, I've gotten better at writing with Tom's voice in mind. His range can do anything, but like with Ray, for example, he's at his best holding out notes and really emoting. And I had, at the beginning of our time together, I had too many words in each song to really show him off, and I think I got better at that. With Tom, Tom can do anything, and I think part of what he enjoys about working with me is I write melodies differently than he would, and as he puts his fingerprints on them and changes them a little bit, but stays true to my original ideas most of the time, that pushes him out of his comfort zone, and that's what helps him grow as a musician. And so I think we enjoy it from that standpoint, and it's very easy. I'll give him the music with scratch vocals in there, and he'll work on it for a few weeks at his studio, send it back, and then we usually get together in person to make edits. Maybe, if we have an opportunity, we'll do the whole thing in the same room this time. That would be fun for a change, and we always enjoy hanging out, whether it's in LA or in Sweden. So, but it's great and easy to work with him.
Okay. One thing that you said is about the racing songs, a lot of albums from the past in Redemption. So in this aspect, so talking about the live concerts, when you will get into the set list to promote the new album or whole stuff from Redemption, how do you deal, or how do you perform Tom alive? Because Ray has their own voice, Tom has their own voice. It's very difficult to know who sings whose song, who sings what song at what time in Redemption career. So how do you deal with this aspect when some people ask you about the songs from Ray era?
Sure. I'm very old, although even I am not so old that I remember being there when Dio replaced Ozzy in Black Sabbath. But that's always been the model. When I talked with Tom about this, and as we've thought about it as a band, I told him, look, it has to be one great vocalist replacing another great vocalist with respect for that era of the band's history, but doing it well enough where the fans will get it. And that carries over into a live set. And when we were talking about picking the songs for the headlining set we did at Prague Power, I'm like, look, let's literally go back to the Heaven and Hell tour and let's see how many Ozzy songs Dio sang. Figure that's as good a test as any for what the audience is ready for. And he also said from his end, Tom's like, all right, what songs will we get killed if we don't play? And so I said, Black and White World, Walls, and maybe a couple of others. So it wasn't that difficult. I think obviously Tom gravitates more to the stuff that he knows better, which is the newer stuff. But I think he also, stuff like Black and White World and Walls, he did a phenomenal job. And I think those are pretty special songs for us. And I think they'll probably always be part of the set. So it worked out pretty well. And, as we build our body of work with Tom, I think it'll be less of an issue over time.
Okay. So, into this aspect, well, it's normal that many people, when hearing Tom's voice, related to the music to Evergrey, because, as you told me, he's an iconic vocalist into the progressive metal. So it's impossible not confuse their voice in other words. So, but because his voice always had it's always had that melancholic and melodic style to sing. It's very different from Ray, very different. Well, it's unique. Their voice is unique, is in general. So how do you play into this theme of the personality, or the Tom's personality, and at the same time creating music from Redemption?
Yeah, there are a couple of things on that. The first is that there aren't many bands that combine really heavy, aggressive music with strong melody. We do it. Evergrey does it. A couple of Nevermore certainly came close. I think Worrell was a remarkable singer, but he wasn't quite as focused on melody the way we are. But there aren't many bands that do that, so the comparisons will be there. And I think from the beginning, Tom's like, I don't want to play guitar. I don't want to write the melody lines. It's already going to sound a little bit like Evergrey, and we need to take steps to make sure it keeps its own identity. So that's always been in the back of my mind. Gosh, I had another point I wanted to make. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never do this. Can you repeat the question one more time? Because I had another point.
So how do you deal with the aspect of the Tom voice into the Redemption music?
Oh, thank you. I remember now. I remember when we were doing a lot the song "Living Something Color." My God, I can't remember the name of my own song. It's because it's been replaced in my mind by a Live in Color, but that song, similar to the emotional depiction of light on this record and Black and White World before it, it's a little bit of a departure. I'm like, if we do this right, it'll be great. If we don't, it's going to be cheesy. And I remember sending it to Tom saying, you brace yourself, you're going to be singing in a major key and it's not unhappy. And we sort of had a good laugh about that. He's a very versatile singer. And, I think we also joke about this. It might just be the weather. The weather in LA is a little sunnier than the weather in Gothenburg, and it's lighter outside a little longer. And so our music has a slightly happier ending than an Evergrey song. But, we also don't shy away from the darkness. So it's a different it taps into a different part of Tom, the part of Tom that's, you know, has a new baby and a relatively new wife and is actually pretty happy, notwithstanding how gloomy Evergrey can sound from time to time. So and you know, we're not like a happy joy band. We like I said, we've got a dark side too, but it's a little bit slightly more major key sounding in some of our stuff. But Tom's, you know, prepared to stretch for that, and I think he does it in a way that's authentically him still.
Great to know. So, well, talking about from this new album, Long Nights in Journey into the Day. When I remember, when I hear it for the first time, I remember that the tone voice is a lot of line there. It's more melodic, more melancholic. But when I hear this, I Am the Storm, I hear a redemption more aggressive, more virtuous, more a lot of things happen, more complicated times, or a lot of progressive into there. So that's my opinion on my approach to this new album. So for you, in terms of what are the biggest difference that exists compared to the previous one to this new one? Perhaps it's more technical, more progressive, or perhaps you have a different point of view of this new album.
Well, I think there've always been sort of three sides to our music. One side, I've never wanted to be perceived as like a wimpy prog band that starts with 2 minutes of atmospheric, you know, stuff like that. And our albums always start with something that's pretty in your face. And I Am the Storm, the title track, is very in your face. That's always been part of what we do. Another part of what we do is sort of shorter songs that are, you know, melodic metal with progressive touches. So whether that's Walls or whether that's Damaged or whether that's Someone Else's Problem off the last record or 7 Minutes from Sunset on this record. And then the third side are these bigger, more exploratory, progressive songs, longer in length. Remember the Dawn, Action at a Distance, those songs off this record. So we've always had different facets. I think the two big changes here, one compositionally, Vikram, our keyboardist, who's also a remarkable composer and arranger and a producer as well. He was more involved in the writing than he was in the previous record, and frankly, more. It's the first time in many years I've had a writing partner. The ideas were still mostly came from kernels that I had, but he put his fingerprints on everything and even brought some pretty advanced ideas, and that they were more or less finished basic concepts for a couple of songs that I got to add to instead of the other way around. So his influence is there. The other big influence is in the production. I think it's, you know, it's gotten much closer to what I've always heard in my head, which is pretty heavy, very melodic. It's not cold and clinical sounding. There's a warmth to it, but you can still hear all the instruments. It's got a lot of punch without sounding over compressed. And I think that credit there goes to Simone, who's an amazing guitar player and a great guy, but also these days has become a highly sought after producer. And the work that he did on this record is fantastic. And I think that the clarity is probably responsible for hearing more technicality that's always been there, but sometimes it's hidden. And I think he gives the music a heaviness that I've always been looking for, but hasn't always been there.
Okay. So into this aspect of technical and progressive, as you can see now around the world, a lot of YouTube musicians play more faster, more technical. A lot of bands appear with like this concept, like calisthenics music, because they play 30 notes in 1 second. That's amazing for some musicians. So you are one of the musicians into the progressive style. That as I told this, I Am the Storm are a lot of technical stuff into there. So do you think that the music needs these elements of the dark, complicated times, riffs, technical, progressive, each second change tempos, etc., to exist? Or what is your point of view of this now calisthenics musicians that exist already in the metal world, especially?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are a lot of different subgenres, and I do think if you look at the sort of arc of music over the last, I don't know, 30 years, you went from bands in the 70s that were, it's fairly, no, I mean, no offense to them, it's not that hard to learn an AC/DC song. Then you move into the 80s and you've got, you know, the Iron Maidens and the Judas Priests, which hard to write a song that good, not that hard to play it. Then you start getting into the mid to late 80s with the thrash scene and the emphasis on musicianship is starting to get stronger. Some of those things are hard to play, you know. And then when you get into the Dream Theater era, now it's really, these are people that are classically or jazz trained musicians, and everybody's a superstar, and the technique continues to increase. And that's sort of where I stalled out. That's why the music sounds the way it does, I think. But now I'm not embarrassed just to learn how they compose. I bought this Periphery book, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I can't play any of this. So these modern bands, that the technique still continues to increase, and there are people that do amazing, like what you, I think, very cleverly call calisthenic music. there's not, you know, when I listen to Periphery, I hear it, but it still sounds like a song to me. There are other bands that I won't name that don't sound like a song. They sound like it's just moving up and down a fretboard, and it's incredibly precise, although I sometimes wonder how much of it is fixed in the studio. But it's, you know, at some point it ceases to be musical. And I think where you find that technique and songwriting intersects, that's when really special stuff happens. And by the way, you know, if we go back to Dream Theater, you think about some of the early stuff they did, Space Dive Vest has as much impact as anything else they ever did. And that's probably the least technique of any song they did in those early records. So it fundamentally is about the songwriting. And if the song calls for technique and technical stuff and time changes, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And there are, you know, I always go back, one of the first prog rock hits that I remember enjoying is Wayward Son by Kansas. That entire song is in the same time signature. It sounds like it's changing, but it's never really herky-jerky, false starts and stops, and never really throws you out of the song. So if you can write music that is, you know, the progressive in the sense of it's not just a simple pop song with a simple structure and a very predictable meter, without making it sound awkward or without making it strange just for the sake of being strange or for showing off, that's the place we like to be. Long answer, sorry. I hope some.
No, don't worry. A detail that you mentioned is that thanks to the bands like Dream Theater, there's a lot of calisthenic musicians raise the fans, and many musicians appear because many people wants to play like John Petrucci, Mike Portnoy, and then a lot of these appear being a lot of bands like I don't remember, but a lot of bands appears during the ends of the 90s with a complicated progressive styles. So, but these bands are forget in time. So perhaps you have another point into the world to show us which bands for you at the ends of the 90s represents to the new movement into the progressive metal as we know.
Well, you know, again, I think it's a function of the songwriting. The bands that wrote great songs from that era, and it's off by a couple of years, but let's take Symphony X as a band that came out of the mid-90s and probably reached a level of popularity by the late 90s that put them where they are. That band, I mean, I wish they made more music. We take too long between records. My buddies in Symphony X take too long as well. And they've had some hardships over there for which I feel terrible. But, you know, that's a band that really placed, of course, they can all play. They're ridiculous musicians. And Mike Romeo, along with Simone, probably, I think, the best guitar player in the world. Or certainly one of them. It's impossible to say which is the absolute best. But that's as good as a guitar player is going to get. So they can play. But Mike labors over composition. And those songs are incredibly well structured. Very different style of music. I'm looking at a Devin Townsend CD on my desk. Not really in the Dream Theater style, but it's certainly not, you know, not pop music. Devin writes some stuff that's very challenging and almost feels like a Frank Zappa meets heavy metal sort of way. But he puts out, you know, if Symphony X doesn't put out enough music, Devin puts out an unbelievable amount of music. But again, still, I think back to like the Ocean Machine record, again, probably 96, 97 versus 99. very different style of music, but those songs are so good that they still hold up. And I would say the bands that, and I'm not going to name them, but I've got a couple in mind. The bands that were accused of being Dream Theater clones, the ones that had great musicianship but didn't have great songs, those are the ones that we don't talk about that much anymore. And nothing to take away from, look, I think what Petrucci did, if you showed a video to Petrucci to Jimi Hendrix, he wouldn't even understand what's going on. In the same way that people that played, that Eric Clapton watching Jimi Hendrix didn't understand what's going on. It's just that the musicianship has advanced so much that people, or a very different example in professional basketball over here, there's a player named Steph Curry who makes these ridiculous shots that nobody else had ever attempted. And maybe somebody could have done it before, but until you actually see that it's possible, you have followers after it's been proven. So I think the Petrucci element of playing made people rethink what was actually possible with the instrument and what they expected of themselves. And that is what brought in new growth. And then somewhere along the line, that compositionally, people like Periphery and the people that came before them started writing in this style that's manic but still makes sense. And there are trailblazers, and then there are people that follow them. And I think that's how music sort of has these inflection points over time.
Okay.
Another long answer. Sorry for the long answer.
Don't worry. Don't worry. And to this aspect, because I really love this kind of answers, because I find a lot of things. So as what you told me, a lot of bands appear when I told you too that appears in the 80s and the 90s. I remember one band that is very very underestimated. It's like Planet X, great band, but no one remembers about that band. It's amazing that. So for this aspect, usually the American media talking about Metal Hammer, Metal Injection, or etc. They love to do these kind of questions. So for you, who are the big four of the progressive metal since the beginning to now? For you, for us, it's Queen's Rise, Dream Theater, Sabotage, and Faith Warning, the first four of the 80s. But perhaps you, as you are a progressive metal player since the beginnings of 2000s, perhaps do you have a different opinion?
Well, honestly, those would have been the four that I named, and they're four different flavors. I mean, Dream Theater is Dream Theater. Fate's Warning, a little less showy, a little more technical. I mean, obviously, given my long association with not just Ray, but also the other members of that band, I know them well. What's amazing about them is I am old enough to have bought Perfect Symmetry when it first came out. Nobody understood what the hell that was in 1988 when it came out, I think. And 10 years later, every band in the world was trying to do that record. It was so far ahead of its time that at the time, it was coming off of No Exit, which is a progressive record for sure, but had a lot of traditional heavy metal, even some thrash in it. To go from that to that really odd metered, cold, clinical sounding stuff with Mark's drums, nobody knew what the hell happened. And, they were really ahead of their time with that record. So they were hugely important. So what I gravitate to with Sabotage is, and this is, there are a couple of different periods in that band's history. I think the big cinematic orchestrated stuff that they did with Paul O'Neill is amazing. It's, it's rock opera is overused as a term, but I think back to Dead Winter Dead, which is really what gave birth to Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Just the merging of classical music and the overlapping vocals. I mean, a lot of my songs are heavily influenced by that notion of having these different vocal melodies colliding and making this huge statement out of it. So hugely influential there. Queensryche definitely pushed the boundaries. I think, they also have a straightforward heavy metal side to them, whether it's Queen of the Reich, or I think they've come full circle and are doing some pretty ass-kicking stuff right now. So I don't think of them in the same way of like, as I do the other three. If I were to add another band, I mean, I mentioned them, well, both the bands I mentioned a minute ago. Devin Townsend, I think, does really interesting stuff. And Symphony X, I think they're their best stuff is some of the best music I've ever heard ever. I mean, the songs like the Accolade or the Odyssey, the longer form stuff, it's phenomenal and phenomenally executed. So there's a lot of great music out there, and I'm sure that because I strive for, I mean, if I liked the trade-off between growling vocals and singing, Periphery would be one of my favorite bands too. I'm just too old. I like constant melody in my music.
Okay, well, we are returning to this new album, and as you can see now, the music industry changed a lot because these digital platforms doing the things for more easily for the people, especially for this new generation, because this generation even they don't know about the music was spread in the 70s, what are the 40s and 50s by singles at that time, and now we are returning to this aspect. Now the singles are more and more predominant into the promotion from an album. So for you, which song, or perhaps which songs capture whole essence in an album that, for me especially, has a lot of textures, layers? For me, it's impossible to say, hey, these songs completely resume all sound from this I Am the Storm. But I'm from the 80s. But if this question goes to the people who are listening just Spotify, just Tidal, and they want to know which songs for the artist is the best songs to know all album.
Yeah, it's tough because, as I said, we've got the three sides to us. So, and if you listened only to I Am the Storm, you might think we're a very different band than if you listened only to the emotional depiction of light. If I had to pick one that represents us best, I think the song "Remember the Dawn," because that contains the aggressive element to a point, and it contains the cinematic, drawn out stuff to a point, and I think there's a strong sense of melody to it. And I think that's, there are other bands that sound somewhat similar to I Am the Storm. It's not wildly different. I don't think there are a lot of bands that sound like Remember the Dawn. So I think that, not saying that we're better than anybody, I'm just saying if somebody wants to know what makes a Redemption song sound like Redemption, that's probably, if I had to pick one, that would be the best one.
Okay. So we're very close to this interview, Nick. And for this aspect, what are the future plans that the band has for this I Am the Storm? Perhaps you will prepare more videos upcoming. Perhaps you will embark on a full tour in Asia, Australia, or perhaps in Europe or North America, or who knows, you will come on a full tour here in Latin America.
I would love to visit Latin America. We're about to we're going to shoot another video. Eventually we'll work on new music. I'd love to get out and play. That's the most fun. The challenge there is it's very difficult to tour in the US when you have European members, because you have to pay a visa for anybody that comes over here, and that's quite expensive. And, we're not going to go sell out 2,000 seaters. We're a small band, and we're going to, need to not lose too much money if we do that. It's more likely that if we get to play a festival or two in Europe or maybe in South America, and that provides us with basically money to fly the band there, and then we can play some dates in between those festivals. I think that's more realistic. Those things just book out so far in advance, and we have to be mindful of Evergrey and other obligations. So I think we're looking at probably next year before we can do any real touring, and we need to get on the European festival circuit now to plan for next year. But we look forward to doing that, and hopefully, there are certainly big festivals in South America as well, and Central America. So I'd love to